Sure. All right. I'll try that again. Gonna convene the working group to examine the taxation of the federally recognized tribal nations for our November 14 meeting. Just want to point out to interested parties that we were hosted at the Mashantucket Tribal Nation a couple weeks back. They gave us a tour of their administrative facilities. It was very illuminating to me. Learned a lot that day. They were very hospitable. Thank you for that. We've convened the meeting. We have our minutes from our last meeting, which was October 17. Draft minutes were distributed. I notice on page 2, there's some struck through language that should probably be eliminated eventually once it's final. If other folks have any additions or subtractions to the minutes, other comments or questions about the minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So the minutes for October 17 are approved. So we've got a few agenda items to go through today. A number of presenters, hopefully going to give us more information to allow us to consider these issues. On the agenda, we have the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation response to the October 17 presentations. And I understand Ms. Conway and Ms. Swift are here today to talk to that item.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start and then Jean will jump in on some slides. We just have a few slides. But first, just wanted the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Council asked me to thank this group for the in-depth analysis that it's giving this really important tax issue, and just very appreciative of the time that the group is putting in. Today, we want to cover a few things, including giving just a little historical context for the Pequot tribe and how it got here. The two different issues that this group has been hearing about and how they are separate issues, a response to Ledger's claims on the financial impact, and then our position on the report that will be need to be provided by this group. So if we go to the first slide, this is, thank you. This is, so the Pequot tribe, we heard a little bit last time from the Mohegan tribe's representatives about kind of their journey. We just wanted to make sure that the tax group had the context for the Pequot tribe. It initiated a lawsuit in 1976, a land claim suit. We heard from Mohegan, they similarly did initiate a land claim suit. And in this region, there were several land claim suits, not just in Connecticut, but, we saw them throughout actually the Northeast. And as a result of that suit, we heard from the mayor of Montville, there was a cloud on titles because the basis of that lawsuit was that the federal government had enacted a law that required any sales or transfers of Indian land to be approved by the federal government. And the allegations from these lawsuits were that that was not done. So the tribe was able to negotiate a resolution of that settlement act. Now, each tribe that has a settlement act, you'll see there was a whole section of Title 25 that just deals with settlement acts. It's now, a lot of those have been moved just to the public law that enacted them, but they're settlement acts for Narragansett, for Penobscot and Passamaquoddy, for the Gayhead Wampanoag tribe, Seneca, Seminole down in Florida. So wide variety, and every one of those settlement acts is a little bit different. Because every tribe's a little different. So each tribe has come up and done things, differently, and that's fine. But the federal government has enacted those based on what was before them at the time and what the tribes priorities were or needed and what the state was or landowners were willing to do at the time. So in 1983, Pequot, they enacted the Settlement Act, which provided recognition, also provided a settlement fund, and provided an area that was designated as settlement lands, and set up a federal reservation for the tribe. Not too far after that, 1983, after the tribe was recognized and had their Settlement Act, they wanted to put in bingo. And so when they did that, the state said, we don't agree that you can do bingo. And so there was litigation. And as I understand it from I wasn't there at the time, but from talking to Jackson King, former general counsel, it was actually what they call a friendly lawsuit, which in the sense that the state and the tribe just said, look, this is a legal issue that's got to be decided. But there was litigation in 1986. The courts decided that the tribe could do bingo without state regulation. Then the tribe continued when the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act was enacted in 1988. The tribe asked the state to negotiate for gaming, and the state refused. They didn't want gaming in the state. So it went up to the Second Circuit, and the Second Circuit said, no, you have to negotiate in good faith. The state and tribe went back down. They did negotiate. Eventually, actually, the tribe agreed to the state's compact. But the state refused to sign it. And, I think from the state's perspective, they did not want gaming at the time. And so the Secretary of the Interior had to promulgate what are called gaming procedures because we could not come to a compact. So that was in 1991 that the gaming procedures went in. And then the gaming procedures went in without slots. So Pequot started without slots. And then in 93, the state and the tribe negotiated the slot MOU, which gave the tribe exclusivity on slots. And the state was paid 25% of slot revenue. In 94 is when Mohegan, as they explained last time, gained or resolved their settlement or did their settlement act. They were federally acknowledged through the Secretary's procedures, as they explained, and they resolved their land claim settlement. But at the same time, because Pequot had gone through all the gaming litigation, at the same time when Mohegan came in, they were able to enter a gaming compact that was nearly identical to the Pequot. And they signed their settlement agreements that they've discussed. And the Pequots actually opened the slot agreement to allow Mohegan in. Now, had they not done that, there would have been litigation, right? There would have been litigation over, who can do what, the slots, whether either tribe could operate slots. And at the same time, when the state and Pequot opened up that slot agreement, it allowed Mohegan to come in because Pequot had that exclusivity, but also broadened the exclusivity to commercial casino games. So, the tribe then went on to, so Mohegan came on. So now both tribes were operating. Pequot tribe, a little different from Mohegan Settlement Act, had land into trust, but we had a lawsuit over land into trust as well. So the state challenged the tribe's ability to take land into trust. That went up to the Second Circuit and ultimately was determined in the tribe's favor. And I just present that just so that the work group understands both tribes have come up. They both have settlement acts, two different histories, two different ways to get up. So it's sometimes hard to compare and contrast, and there's not a right or a wrong way. It's just every tribe has done it differently, and all tribes have struggled to some degree to get to where they are today. The next slide, please. So I think really from our discussions last time, I think if there's one thing that we hope that everyone will understand when we leave today is we really do, the Pequots really do see these as separate issues. The issue on non-Indian personal property. So Pequot's proposal originally was to enact a statute that would exempt non-Indian owned personal property that's located on trust lands. That issue is distinct in our view from the Mohegan settlement agreements and the issues that they explained in detail last time. We've heard that they're connected because I believe the way it was worded was if the state enacts the exemption, Montville will bring a lawsuit under the settlement agreement. And we've listened and we've looked at the agreement, and we just do not see a basis for litigation under the agreement. The agreements do not address non-Indian personal property. They address property that is owned by the tribe, tribally owned property. They address it for real estate and they address it for personal property. They do not address non-Indian property. I have not seen it. I've not heard in any presentations where it's addressed. And the fact that, anyone can bring a lawsuit, anyone could bring a lawsuit, but there has to be a good faith basis for a lawsuit. And I didn't hear from Montville, and maybe Montville can help us understand what that lawsuit is based on. Because as I see it in the agreements, it's not the right to tax. It's the tribe agreeing to pay a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes on tribal property. I don't see where the tribe agrees to pay on non-Indian property, and the non-Indians are not, they're not parties to this agreement. So there is no lawsuit that could be brought, certainly against the non-Indians under this agreement. So we want to just be clear that we don't see the two as connected. We think they're two important issues, and we support Mohegan in their efforts to address their settlement agreement, but it is a distinct and separate issue from the tax exemption, the dual tax exemption that we're seeking. There two have different, we've heard questions about fiscal notes, and it's an important issue, how this will impact the towns, the state. What is the fiscal note? The fiscal note for the two are very different. We know what the tax exemption fiscal note is. We know what the towns currently are receiving, and there's already been a fiscal note on that. As to the Mohegan settlement agreement, I don't know what that would be, and that would be between the state and the Mohegan tribe. We really wouldn't have any input into that at all. And I'll turn it over the next slide to Jean.
Okay. Thank you, Betsy. Appreciate that kind of chronology of our history and getting recognition and really making a very clear distinction amongst the two issues. I want to kind of switch gears now and talk a little bit about the financial impact to Ledyard, and that essentially it's really not supported by the numbers. A very important point is we believe it's an incorrect comparison to make against cost to educate, because there's no Ledyard taxpayer who essentially covers 100% of the cost to educate their children. That's not the purpose of taxation in Ledyard, to get 100% coverage from individual taxpayers. And we just wanted to kind of point that out as an important point to make as we kind of review these numbers. We have approximately 84 students or school-age children on the reservation that live on trust or restricted fee lands that also attend Ledyard schools. Coincidentally, we actually have plenty of students who attend private and other schools as well, but 84 for Ledyard. And we've in kind of crunching our numbers, we understand that Ledyard receives impact aid from the federal government of approximately $5,400 per pupil. So that's again approximately $5,400 per pupil, which equates to $453,600 annually. In addition to that, federal impact aid, Ledyard also receives pilot payments from the state, which is just a little bit over $1 million. And the pilot payments from the state of Connecticut are based mostly on the trust lands. I think it's like 97% or so of it. Ledyard receives, in addition to that, you can round it to almost 1.4 million from the MPTN Mohegan Fund. So I've just delineated 3 different cost structures here. There's the impact aid, which is a little under $500,000. There's the pilot payments from the state, which is $1 million. And then there's a roughly just rounding to 1.4 from the Mohegan Fund, MPTN Mohegan Fund. Okay, layer onto that the property taxes that Ledyard receives on Two Trees, which there are no school children associated with Two Trees. That's a business, a commercial property that we have. It's essentially a motel lodging that we provide. It's spillover lodging. It's been closed, unfortunately, since the pandemic, but we still pay a handsome property tax on that. Ledyard receives $447,000 and change for Two Trees. And then we have about 67 students or school age children that live on tribal member owned fee lands in Ledyard. So that's taxpayers that attend Ledyard schools. And that source of taxes equates to roughly just under $330,000 for these fee properties from Ledyard. What we found is Ledyard did provide, and I think they had sent something yesterday, an analysis of their revenues and expenditures relating to MPTN. And I think everyone on the working group received this. Just hold it up for your viewing. They're purporting that there's approximately $1.3 million of unfunded educational costs. And if that were accurate, and if it was essential that we pay 100% of the cost to educate the children, you can see by the numbers I've just gone through, we more than cover that. We more than cover that in pilot fees. We more than cover that from the MPTN Mohegan Fund. We more than cover that when you look at the other property taxes that we pay, and also the impact aid. So that's more than covered if everybody wanted to accept this as a given, as being accurate and true. Next slide, please. The impact aid to Ledyard, again, it's not supported by the numbers. We have here just a little bit of a look back that we've done over the last 10 years to support some of the Ledyard towns that are Ledyard roads, rather. These are not state roads here that are specifically named. This is just kind of our good neighbor philosophy that we kind of take on. We have assisted in certain cases. We may have had grant revenues. In other cases, it's just other tribal funding that we've lent a hand to help with these roads, such as Lantern Hill, Shoebridge Road, the bridge on Shoebridge Road, Coachman Pike, and Jessica Lane. This doesn't, of course, include the bypass that we spent tens of millions of dollars for Route 2. That's not Ledyard, but we did that to kind of help with traffic flow. And that was something we did of our own volition with some of the larger projects. And we've also helped with the Boom Bridge Road project, which is a road that essentially that kind of borders both Ledyard and North Stonington. We've had some assistance in assisting with that as well. So this right here shows over $1 million of kind of that good neighbor approach that we have in assisting Ledyard with some of the road repair and maintenance. Next slide, please. Then lastly, I'd like to talk about the financial impact of kind of the public safety or the policing. The tribe entered into an MOU with the state back in August of 2014. And essentially that allows for on reservation policing by tribal police, that they are now the primary police force on the reservation. Prior to that, it was the state police. Ledyard, approximately a year and a half or so later, in 2016, opted to move from a state residence trooper model to a full municipal police force. That was something that they did. That was at their option or discretion to do so. And I can only imagine, I don't have the numbers in terms of a cost structure, but I would imagine a full force municipal police is significantly more costly than the resident trooper model. The major roads to Foxwoods and the museum and the reservation are routes 2 and routes 214. These are state roads. And so essentially state police are responsible for patrolling those primary roads. It's essentially no different than if Hartford had a development that impacts East Hartford or West Hartford, those towns cannot reach into Hartford to tax. So it's a very similar parallel. Just wanted to point that out. So thank you. I'll turn it back over to Betsy.
Okay. And for our last slide is just, at the end of this, the group is required to submit a report to the General Assembly. And from the Pequot tribe's perspective, we're endorsing a recommendation that the work group recommend the adoption of a property tax exemption. 12-81 is the state statute right now that contains all of the exemptions for property taxes. And for, as we've said, non-Indian owned personal property located on lands held in trust by the United States for the benefit of a federally recognized tribe. We think this should be supported for several reasons, including that it recognizes tribal sovereignty and provides for equitable tax policy, with the government that is providing the services in the location being able to receive tax dollars to go towards those services. It treats both tribes the same. Both tribes are treated the same under this exemption. As I mentioned in an earlier slide, we don't see the support for there being litigation if this is enacted. The state tells the municipalities what they can do as far as tax goes. It is the state that enacts the laws and says, this is what you can tax, this is what you can't tax, here's what the exemptions are. And the town of Montville would follow those same exemptions. And there's nothing in the agreement that gives Montville authority to do anything outside of state law on this. And it certainly does not allow them to impose something on somebody who's not a party to the agreement. So that is why, those are the primary reasons we think that the group should endorse this tax exemption. We also support Mohegan's efforts to address their settlement agreement. We just are not a party to those. That is between Mohegan and the state of Connecticut and the town of Montville. They weren't a party to our settlement and weren't involved in our settlement, and we support them, but we think it's a just separate issue, and it shouldn't be linked or dependent to the tax exemption that we're proposing. And we thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Conway. Does anyone in the group have questions, comments? Anyone on the, Mr. Bennell?
I have a couple comments, actually. I guess on behalf of the tribal council, I would have to say that, while Betsy is an esteemed attorney, we're getting advice from other attorneys and talking to the town, and they've told us that they are going to litigate. And so I think the tribal council is taking counsel from their counsel, but appreciate your opinions. But that's.
Is there a basis for it that they've shared with you?
I would defer to our attorneys. The Attorney General is here.
Yeah, so I don't think this is the forum to litigate in. I wouldn't advise my client to lay out our litigation strategy, just as I wouldn't expect Montville in this forum to lay out their litigation strategy. I think even if Montville were to say to this body, we don't know if we would sue, or we don't know if we have a claim. I don't think that that's something that I can cite in court, just like I can't cite anybody else's legal opinion in court to say, see, judge, we're right, they're wrong. And so the litigation issue is really a red herring of saying that there is no litigation, because it's really not going to be decided by anyone in this room. It's really going to be decided in litigation that Mohegan will have to defend, not anyone else in this room will have to defend. So I think that that's a bit of a red herring. I guess the other thing that I would say is that with regard to taxation, I understand this body is looking at the taxation of federally recognized Indian tribes. I think that's the broad title. It's not taxation of non-Indian personal property on trust lands. And so I'm not going to go over again Mohegan's presentation because this body has all heard it. I will just say that if you focus just on the fact of non-Indian personal property on trust lands, you have a vastly, I'll call it unique situation where the tribe would be paying personal property taxes on its trust lands, but the non-Indian entity that we would lease to would not be paying personal property. So we're already in an upside down world with regard to the inequities of Mohegan's agreement with Montville. And I think that result would just exacerbate the unicorn that the Mohegan-Montville agreement is.
Yeah,
So I think to conclude, on behalf of the council, we would disagree with the position of the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Council that this is a rifle shot to deal with a single taxation issue. The working group is supposed to look at taxation of federally recognized tribal nations. And we have agreements that need to be considered in that global discussion. That's why we're all here. And we'll look for global solutions collectively. But the idea that we're going to just say, no, let's just fix one issue and ignore the larger issue is unacceptable to the Mohegan government.
yeah,
It's useful information,
yeah.
Attorney Conway.
And I would just say, we're not suggesting that you shouldn't address both. We're saying they shouldn't be dependent on one another. So that is our real point here is absolutely the state should be discussing this with Mohegan regarding their settlement agreements, but we don't think the two should be interconnected or dependent. That's the position.
Understood. Other questions from the group? Comments?
I have
Mr. Bennell, one more thing.
one more thing. I apologize. We just got 14 minutes before today's meeting, Senator Austin's presentation. Fortunately, we did bring Anthony Casdia, the Chief Financial Officer for the Mohegan Tribal Nation, but he just got it 14 minutes ago. And unfortunately, as he goes through it, he can already, there's some apples and oranges things happening here.
So that's why I'll go through it and then we'll talk like we got yours last time, 14 minutes ahead of time. So we're just going to move along.
Well, we didn't,
That's when we got yours, 14 minutes ahead of time. So we'll just move along and we'll just present it and you can come back next
I'm
month.
sorry,
Thank you.
wow.
We'll,
I-
Senator Austin's ready to present her information today, so we'll let her do that. And we will give equal time to others.
Mr. Chair, Mr.
Yes.
Chair, there's a hand up on Zoom. Mr. Rich has his hand up, I believe. Police Chief.
I don't think he's using the method, so we didn't see it. Sorry, Maria.
And no, that's okay. Honestly, I can't find the hand raised thing on my screen either. So I had a quick question too, but please proceed.
Does someone have a question?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Chief John Rich from Ledyard Police Department. Thank you for a couple of minutes here. I just wanted to make a comment on the previous presentation from the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation. Just one finer point. The speaker alluded to the fact that Route 2 and Route 214 are state roads and that therefore the police coverage on those roads is provided by the state police. And that's simply incorrect. The Ledyard Police Department covers the entire length of Route 2 in the town of Ledyard, as well as Route 214 running between Route 12 and Route 2. And that's entirely the jurisdiction of the Ledyard Police Department for crashes, DUIs, crimes and anything else that happens on those state roadways. The town does not maintain those roadways. The town doesn't plow those roadways, but the Ledyard Police Department does provide primary police coverage in those areas. And that's all I wanted to clear up, sir.
Okay, thank you for your input.
And
Other questions?
could I had a quick question too as well.
President
Mr.
Horn.
Thank you. I thank you for the presentation. I always appreciate the detail and the effort that's gone into this very tricky, thorny issue, which involves both a lot of specific numbers and some big principles. So I on the big principle point, I guess I wanted to clarify something that I think Betsy said at the very end of the presentation about so I'll go back. We've heard on other days presentations about the importance of this concept to, tribal sovereignty and self-governance. And I just wanted to clarify that to me, the requirement or the agreement that the state is party to that requires a tribe to make property tax payments seems to me an even more egregious violation of those principles or and other equally egregious violation of those principles as the taxation of non-tribal entities. And I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Representative Horn. Other questions on this topic or comments? Hearing none. So Senator Austin did want to present today some information, and we will make time at a subsequent meeting for additional review of whatever she's presenting. So we will have a full airing of all these issues, but we'll recognize Senator Austin to make a presentation.
Thank you. I've been working on this for a couple of years now and have gone through, and we can go to the next slide. I will just dive right into this. So dual taxation, which is really the circumstance of a government reaching into the territory of another government to impose taxes on that particular original government. Both tribes agree on the facts below, that there are Ledyard charges non-tribal businesses on Mashantucket land $553,000 as of 2023 in personal property taxes. For an example would be Hard Rock Cafe. This is equivalent to 0.49% of 1 mil in Ledyard. Montville charges non-tribal businesses on Mohegan land $554,000 as of 2023 in personal property. For example, Michael Jordan's Steakhouse. This is equivalent to 0.3849% of 1 mil in Montville. That is the numbers of 553,000 and 554,000 were reviewed by OFA, talked with the assessors of both Montville and Ledyard to get the exact numbers. Tribal government provides all associated municipal services to these non-tribal businesses in both of the two tribal nations: police, fire, public health, safety, etc., all provided by the tribal nations. And out of respect for the sovereign nation of each tribe, it is requested that the state eliminate the ability of neighboring municipalities to impose personal property taxes on tribal trust lands. Neither tribe is seeking compensation from the state of Connecticut. So tribal governance costs, both of these numbers came directly from the tribal nation themselves. And it just lists what would normally be governance costs in a municipality. Their tribal governments include things like social services. They include things like healthcare costs. They include the offices that are necessary to govern a tribal nation. It was more broken out on one side than the other side. The main differences would be relative to water and sewer. The Mohegan tribal nation uses the sewer plant in the town of Montville, which Mohegan paid to upgrade. And the Mashantucket have their own sewer treatment plant on the confines of their reservation. The same is true for water. And both of them have public safety, which is police, fire, court, and they both have a museum. So that's just generally, and their costs are very much the same. 125 million, excuse me, in the Mashantuckets, and 116 million in Mohegan. So generally the same. Those were not independently verified by an outside source, and I don't think they need to be. So there is a tribal impact that we have, and they have businesses off the reservation. Those businesses off the reservation are detailed here. Some are in Connecticut and some are in other states. Most important for me is that there are 5,000 employees that are mostly here in the state of Connecticut. Those 5,000 employees in both Mashantucket and Mohegan live in our state, live in our surrounding communities. They pay taxes in surrounding communities. They buy food. They have children that go to schools in the surrounding communities. This is, to me, has always been the most important number between the two tribal nations, that between the two of them, there are more than 10,000 people that work at either the governance of the tribal nations or within the main large business of the casino. Next slide, please. This slide is who is a top 10 taxpayer. In my own town in Sprague, Mohegan owns the country club that's there. They are a top 10 taxpayer in the town of Sprague. These numbers were again verified by the Office of Fiscal Analysis on what the exact assessed value of the properties were as of 2022, and they remain in a top taxpayer. East Windsor, while the two tribal nations are not a top 10 taxpayer there, they split that tax bill, which is about, it is a lot of money that the two of them pay to East Windsor in a contract that was signed with the state of Connecticut to not start the project in East Windsor. I think we should have still started the project because I would have liked to see another business in East Windsor, but that's not where we are. As a matter of fact, the Mashantucket Mohegan Pequot Fund pays $1 million to East Windsor every year to compensate them for not finishing that project. So taxes paid to Ledyard were already talked about by the Mashantuckets. There are taxes paid to Montville. Unfortunately, we were unable to get that information in time for this presentation. They own properties just like Mashantucket owns properties. They're not in a top 10 taxpayer in Montville, but what they are paying for taxes should also be under consideration. And the assessor in Montville had a death in the family and was unable to provide those dollars. Do the towns receive state aid as a result of reservation activity? Yes, they do. And this is what Ledyard and Montville get from the Mashantucket Pequot Mohegan Fund, an annual distribution. These numbers have been increasing over the last couple of years as we have been able to increase the amount of MMPF funds to both Ledyard and Montville. In addition to that, we passed a law about 3 years ago that increased the amount of pilot payment that would be made for reservation land from 45% to 100%. And when we did that, it increased the amount of pilot payments that both Ledyard and Montville received from the state. And Ledyard gets $1 million plus. That's 97.5% of the payment that is related to lands in trust. Montville gets 2 million plus, and that's 63.3% of this payment is related to lands in trust. They also have a prison in Montville that is at 100% too. So that's money that they receive directly as a result of having the reservations in their particular, next to their particular towns. An education overview. Is there an educational cost to the towns related to the reservations? And these numbers came from the two superintendents in the towns. And so Ledyard has a total of 2,435 students. They also have a VOAG program in Ledyard, which increases the number of students that they have there. 84 students come from the reservation. They have 260 special education children. 31 are students that are on the reservation. They have 20 students that are in the excess cost part of special education, and one of them is from the reservation. That's 3% of the total students. 11% of the total students for special education, and 11.5% of the special education students are related to students from the reservation. Montville has 2,017 students. They have no students that are from the reservation. They have 397 special education students. None of them are from the reservation, and they have 23 students that are excess cost. But I did find a report that's also in our packet here today. The State Department of Education reports that there are 69 American Indian students in Ledyard and 12 American Indian students in Montville. Now, I think that those numbers need to be checked, because just based on the number of students that are from the reservation in Mashantucket and Ledyard going to the Ledyard school systems, and the students, another 70 students that are that live in Ledyard that are also related to the Mashantucket tribal nation. That seems to me that they're not accurately accounting the number of American Indian students in either the towns of Ledyard or Montville, and I think that that needs to be looked at. So then the educational overview. The town receives $5,458 per child, were the numbers that I received from the superintendent, with $458,472 for the Mashantucket Pequot tribal nation. They also receive $544,807 for military students, which numbers about 100 students. And there is an additional smaller amount received from children of workers employed by the Mashantucket Pequot tribal nation. Montville does not apply for this funding, but they are eligible. And 33% of Mohegan workers live in the town of Montville, according to a Connecticut DOT report that was looking at moving the train system up to the Norwich area. And they calculated the number of people that would be eligible to use this, and used the number of workers that would live in the town of Montville. Is there any in-kind educational benefit from the tribe to the town? There are two Mashantucket Pequot tribal nation staff that visit Ledyard schools twice per week, with a memorandum of understanding between the Mashantucket Pequots and the school system. Next slide, please. These are two sheets that are directly from the State Department of Education. And this is just an educational overview of what Ledyard receives from the state of Connecticut and the federal government. So they get for ECS $11,624,199. They have an agricultural science program that receives over $1 million. And for excess costs, they get $943,236. And as a side note, for excess costs, the state of Connecticut and the legislature has been attempting to pay 100% of the excess cost. We just haven't quite reached it yet. Now, these other grants that are for both, and the next slide is for Montville, it's the same for Montville. These are federal programs that help offset the cost of special education in every school system. Every single school system in the state has a sheet just like this, which talks about how much money they get for Title I, Title II, Title III, IDEA, ARPA, ESSER, Title IV. So these are numbers that allow us to see that it's not just what the state is giving to the school systems. It's also including federal dollars that are going into the school system. So next is public safety and infrastructure overview. So mutual aid, the towns of Montville and Ledyard and the tribal nations participate in mutual aid. That means that if there was a fire in Norwich, everyone may respond, including Ledyard, Montville, Mohegan, and Mashantucket. From the two tribal nations, the fire aid in Mashantucket per month was 3.77 calls, and yearly 45 calls, 45.2, and in Mohegan 3.33 calls for fire aid and 40 calls for fire aid. EMS and paramedics are on the Mashantucket side contracted with American Ambulance. And that is also true for Ledyard. Ledyard contracts for their EMS and paramedic intercept. Mohegan provides a benefit for the region of EMS and paramedic intercept about each month, about 16.08 calls in EMS, and paramedic about 130.2%, 130.2 calls, with a total of 193 calls of EMS and 1,563 in Mohegan. Into in mutual aid from other towns into the two reservations, fire aid 0.15 each month to 1.8 each year, and 0.5 on Mohegan and 6 yearly. Relative to EMS and paramedic, insurance pays a portion of the costs of EMS and paramedic services. This, like every other town that participates in having EMS and paramedic services, it never pays the whole cost of the program. The cost of the program is picked up by that respective municipality, or in this case, the tribal nation. So the costs to support infrastructure in Ledyard are listed here. That was already gone over. And a public safety overview continued. So we wanted to figure out what our municipal police forces comparable in size and cases to other similarly sized municipalities. So the population is here. The Montville population is 18,000. It goes down to 54 on the reservation of Mohegan. There are a number of sworn officers, and Ledyard has, for example, 23 officers. They were established in 2017, and Montville was just established in 2023. They had a wonderful ceremony just a little bit ago. Mohegan has another 44 officers, of 40 officers, and Mashantucket has 39 plus 6 part-time. So that gives you the number of sworn officers, and as you can see, they are well within the confines of other similarly sized municipalities. And the numbers that I got those for was from the OLR, the Office of Legislative Research, and LCO, and they gave numbers, and that is here in the packet too, to give the number of both traffic stops and DUIs. So both Montville and Ledyard have, one has in 22, the last full year, they had 2,486 traffic stops in Montville and 2,986 in Ledyard. of DUIs, Montville had 55 and Ledyard had 47. Because these numbers are a little bit higher than some of the surrounding towns, except for the town of Wilton, which had over 4,000 traffic stops, I asked the group that looks at traffic stop numbers to do a review and mapping to see if all of that is related to either the reservations or to the business of the casino, and see if we can figure that out. We also, at the last meeting, we talked a little bit about pistol permits, and we have passed a bill in the legislature signed by the governor that says that pistol permits can now be done by the two reservations if they so choose. But we asked Ledyard, how many pistol permits did you do? And in the last 6 years, they reviewed 7 applications and approved 6 temporary permits for pistols. Certainly nothing that would impact anything. So on the taxation overview, so what I did in this next sheet was if taxes went up 3% in the town over a decade, how much would be increased on the non-tribal vendors? And it would go up about close to $200,000. And this also each, about $200,000 each, would put additional burdens on the non-tribal vendors in the reservation for no benefits from the towns that they are being taxed on. And Ledyard has a mill rate of 34.56. One mill raise is $1,111,309. And Montville has a tax rate of 27.77. One mill raise is $1,441,536. Both of these numbers were verified by the Office of Fiscal Analysis. But that's not the only thing that we have to deal with here today. And so we do have to deal with the Mohegan Tribe settlement agreements. I also believe that that there are 2 separate and distinct issues, one on dual taxation on non-tribal businesses. But I also think that we should address the issue of the Mohegan settlement agreement. Both tribes would equally benefit from the passage of the core dual taxation proposal that we originally started, I think 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now. But any changes made to the Mohegan settlement agreements, and I think we'll have a presentation on that afterwards, are maybe subject to the Department of the Interior approval. This is not the case for proposals related to the core issue of dual taxation. The state has full purview over the proposed exemption for non-tribally owned businesses operating on trust land, as referenced in the previous slides. So we do have an agreement, and both agreements have been put in your packet, and you have seen emailed copies of them. Every year, Mohegan deposits $500,000 into the Montville capital account. The agreement between Mohegan and Montville, signed on June 16th in 1994, required a one-time payment of $3 million to develop a water distribution system for Montville, which included Mohegan's needs. Requires the use of the Preston incinerator to dispose of waste and allows Montville to add the refuse to its tonnage. And I know that Montville is now using Lisbon, so I'm assuming that Mohegan is now using the Lisbon incinerator. Requires an upgrade and then use of the Montville's wastewater collection and treatment system that was paid for in its entirety by Mohegan. Requires Mohegan to pay for the services of Rome, Frankel, and Kennelly to work towards attaining a 1% of the gaming funds and a $3 million payment from Montville. For any land acquired in trust beyond the initial 700 acres, requires the Mohegan tribe to pay pilot for real property taxes that would be due on such land if it were not tax exempt. And all tribally owned motor vehicles and personal property located on such land with some limited exceptions for computers, data processing, and telecommunications. In the agreement for, and how did we get there? In the agreement for Mohegan and the state settlement agreement signed on April 4th, 1994, it set up Mohegan's obligation to pay pilot on trust land holdings that exceeded 700 acres in an amount that would be paid if the property were not tax exempt. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs, in a letter back to this the state, approved that as of December 4th, 1994. These issues of tribal property are specific to only Mohegan and should be addressed. Relative to conclusions, passage of an exemption for non-tribal businesses operating on trust land is warranted for the following reasons. Each federally recognized tribe is a sovereign government that supports all the municipal needs of the non-tribal businesses operating on their trust lands. These businesses receive no services from the towns of Ledyard and Montville. Allowing Ledyard and Montville to continue taxing non-tribal businesses undermines the ability of each tribe to support its own infrastructure and governmental needs. Most importantly, both tribes are economic engines in the state, and Connecticut should support their endeavors and respect their sovereign rights. Passage of an exemption treats each tribe equally. Consequences of passage of the exemption legislation. Passage of an exemption for non-tribal businesses would result in an approximate annual revenue reduction of between $500,000 and $700,000 for Ledyard and Montville. To hold Ledyard and Montville harmless, the state should commit an annual Mashantucket Pequot Mohegan Fund increase of 2023 revenues received by each town for this taxation. This would not increase with the advent of any new economic development on the reservations. Subsequent action warranted. Montville should immediately stop taxing motor vehicles on Mohegan tribal lands. There is not any substantiation warranting such taxation, and that's around $90,000 a year. And that's not something that should be happening right now based on even the agreement between Montville and Mohegan. Connecticut should remove Section 1F from its agreement between Mohegan and the state, which is regarding pilot payments from the Mohegan State Settlement Agreement. This needs to happen first before we work on anything between Mohegan and Montville, because this is the first step. This passed first before they had an agreement with the town of Montville. And that would remove that requirement from Mohegan and Montville to establish their agreement. Mohegan and Montville should commence discussions immediately to bring agreement to a standard recognizing the tribe's sovereignty. The contract between the settlement agreement between Mohegan and Montville allows for these discussions. If those discussions are not fruitful, it should come back to the legislature for us to look at. It is both of them, the agreement that was made by Mohegan and by Montville at the time, in my opinion, does disrespect sovereignty, and it needs to respect it and should be today be looked at. Now, relative to what cost that would be to Montville, the state already, as I previously reported, increased the amount that we would pay on land in trust to 100%. If any land was moved over into in trust, it would have an economic impact on the state of Connecticut's pilot payment to the respective towns. And we would do this no matter what the business was. If a college adds additional land onto them, we increase our amount of pilot to the respective municipalities. If a hospital adds property onto their hospital, we increase the amount of pilot for that respective community. This would be the same setup that would happen, and we never know what lands are going to go into trust or not into trust, because the agreement is not that land in trust is just a decision made by the tribal nation. It also has to be agreed on and accepted by the federal government. That's how land goes from in fee to in trust, and I'm simplifying the argument. But if Mohegan and Montville come to an agreement, that would take care of land going into trust for the town of Montville. And that would leave outstanding the $500,000 payment that Mohegan makes into the Montville capital account. Now, they could choose to, in good neighborly fashion, continue that if they so choose, or not. But that would be a discussion between the two of them first before the state imposes on the town of Montville to negate an agreement that they have with Mohegan. I think the two of them should first start that discussion. So, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the group or comments? Anthony, I'm sorry, what's your last name?
Kazdia.
Mr. Kazdia.
I would just like to turn to the tribal government cost sheet. And thank you, Senator Austin, for putting this out there. We just didn't have the opportunity to make sure they're apples to apples. So I just wanted to augment what was here so that we could move towards that. From a health services perspective, Mohegan provides approximately $14.3 million in support for social services, pharmacy, care, also family services and elder care. From an education perspective, approximately. Yeah, so all of these really need to get reworked, this entire sheet here. So yeah, there's some things that would need to move around. Utilities, these only that the cost of $946,000, these are only the administrative costs of, running the switch gear and whatnot. The costs of providing the service itself, the utilities, are $20.3 million per year. And there's also, which you mentioned earlier, or at least Chuck, and I think Larry had also the $30 million in improvements that went to the town of Montville from an infrastructure standpoint. That said, we would like to go through what's in the deck and just make sure that it's accurate from our perspective on an apples to apples basis. But thank you for putting this together.
Thank you. And to be clear, I did call you and talk to you about these numbers.
You did,
All
but
right.
the context wasn't on a comparative basis.
Right.
We spoke and we focused on this from an administrative perspective,
Okay.
trying to isolate which costs were, affecting the local community that may not be tribal.
Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other members of the group? Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. And I'm just looking at the consequences of passage of the exemption legislation. So this addresses the approximate annual revenue reduction. So is it my understanding? I'm on conclusions, last page. And the second section, consequences of passage. So there is a projected annual revenue reduction of 500,000 to 700,000 for the two respective towns. The state exempts those properties from property tax and the ability of the towns. We hold them harmless by filling that in with increased Mashantucket Peak. Now, is it my understanding that because at that point you have banned taxation of those properties, there would be no, and the towns furthermore, going forward would never be able to assess additional property taxes. Therefore, that initial amount should be sufficient to fill the hole.
Correct.
Okay, but I believe an earlier slide references increases in property taxes per year. So my conclusion is this fills the hole now, but obviously any future property tax increases that would have applied to these properties would now be off the table for the town. So they would not only be, it fixes it today, but if they had forecast this is going to be in our budget, we have this increase in property taxes. There is nothing in this agreement that would make up for any potential future loss. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments from the group? Anybody online?
Can you take the slide?
Okay. A lot to digest there, and we'll do so, and we'll probably have at least one more meeting. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Swift?
I just wanted to maybe offer a suggestion to Representative Cheeseman's question, perhaps a COLA inflator, just a cost of living, that's essentially would track over time for that increase that from the Pequot Mohegan Fund. So
Right.
that 500,000 and that 700,000, maybe it just annually increased for COLA. That's just a recommendation to put
Yeah.
out there for consideration.
And I would negate that, because we're changing a policy that on its face did not recognize the sovereign component of it. And I don't think the state is willing to take on changes in a COLA for a policy that should never have happened in the first place. And that's where I really am. I just don't think that that's an obligation of the state to do so. And we have been very generous with our supports because I personally added in a large amount from the Mashantucket Pequot Fund, because quite frankly, Eastern Connecticut doesn't think they get enough from the Mashantucket Pequot Fund, and I put a bill in every year to change that. And we'll continue to put that bill in, and I'm sure Jeff will continue to negate the bill that I get passed 100%, but I'm not willing to suggest that we take on a COLA in this. It's not necessary. If we truly are looking to change a policy that was not appropriate, we shouldn't take on the ills of that policy forever.
Fair. Thank you.
Other questions or comments from the group? If not, we'll move on to our next item on our agenda, which is to discuss the fiscal impact, which I guess we just were, of changes to the current statute. This is a general discussion opportunity, I guess. I think we're probably going to have one more meeting before we're done. Thank you for the reminder that we have a deadline of January 1st, 24 for recommendations. Whatever the group decides to do on that. So we probably need one more meeting to discuss those. But if anyone wants to start the observations about fiscal impacts, I'll start things off just for folks' edification, or not. The office I work for is working on budget recommendations for the governor for the midterm adjustments in the fiscal 25. We just did our consensus revenue update with Office of Fiscal Analysis yesterday for November. We'll do another one in January before the session. As you can see, our revenues are a little softer than we had projected back in May, and then we estimated in the adopted budget. So things are moving around. If you read our comptroller's letter every month, you'll see deficiencies emerging and lapses that we are seeing. These are things we have to do to balance the current year. Our deficiency letter, our comptroller's letter, I think of as the first draft of our deficiency bill, because it's showing you ahead of time every month what we're going to have to make up for to keep in balance for the current year. But you can extrapolate to the second year. That's what we're doing midterm adjustments for. So we've got some revenue issues, but even bigger than that, my bigger concern at the moment, and I've been saying this to anyone who will listen, is we have a spending cap. We went right up to the cap in terms of the adopted budget, and we have no room under the cap to speak of. In fact, in terms of our review of current services, we may be over the cap for 25 unless we make adjustments to get back under. We'll also need to make adjustments to make room for a whole host of new expenditures that we know we have to do for a variety of imperative policy reasons, because we know that the governor's going to have some policy recommendations, and our friends in the General Assembly have a lot of priorities as well. So we have a lot of work to do just to make room for all of that. So I am quite skeptical of making changes in policy that will necessitate new appropriations, which is what these conclusions that Senator Austin alludes to would require. We'd have to make a new appropriation in that fund to make those towns whole. The other thing that occurs to me in listening to this debate is we have a lot of information about the very complicated financial relationship between the federal government, the state government, the towns, and the tribal nations. And these numbers about who pays what and what the costs of what are, it's very complicated. It's accreted over decades. And I'm not, as I sit here today, I'm very skeptical of, in the course of this group, coming up with a one change that we think is warranted without considering what are the spillover effects. Because once you open up a topic, everyone comes in with related topics, as the Mohegan tribe has come in with their related topic. The towns have their concerns. Town of Montville, I believe in our last meeting, said they were concerned about future taxes that they would be foregoing. It's one thing to say that today we won't compensate you for that, but that won't stop them from coming in and asking for it. So we'll be opening up a can here if we make a change to the status quo. That's my concern going forward in terms of the budget and in terms of what we would be opening ourselves up for a debate. That said, if there's other questions or comments, Senator Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate what you say, but we always look at legislation to correct inequities. And there is a clear inequity that happened here. And to pass by and say that we should not deal with the inequities relative to the two tribal nations, who are the two largest businesses in the state. We come in and provide Electric Boat and Pratt and Whitney and Sikorsky hundreds of millions of dollars of tax credits. Hundreds of millions of dollars of tax credits. And I respect those businesses. I fight for them every day. I also fight for these two, which have their own respective concerns. And when we are not paying attention to what is clearly an inequity that happened after generations and generations of conflict and very wrong settlement agreements that have happened for every tribal nation that's out there. We have an obligation to correct that inequity. We need to figure it out. We don't need to punish our municipalities for following the state's policy of inequitable agreements. And that is what has happened here, is an inequitable agreement. Now, I'm very aware of the fact that we have a spending cap. We were $11 million under the spending cap in year 2. $11 million under the spending cap in year 2. And this policy has been looked at for 3 years now. This committee was set up to see if it was a real policy. It is a real policy that was enacted to negatively affect two of our largest businesses, if we only care about the business, and two of our federally recognized tribal nations, which have clearly presented cases that are accurate, that we are providing and maintaining an inequitable policy. And we need to stop that. We need to just flat out stop that. And between the two of them, it's $1 million. It's $1 million. And we need to say, if we say that we are going to continue an inequitable policy because of $1 million, $11 million under the spending cap right now. And I know the numbers. I read the comptroller's letter. I read the concerns of people. And I voted and maintained that we should have the fiscal guardrails in and fought for that. But we have regulations right now that are before the Regs Review Committee that the agencies have submitted that are $80 million, causing $80 million of expenses that we're not addressing. So 80 million in one, I vote for the one. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Austin. Other comments? Attorney
Yes,
Conway.
The only thing I would add to that is the Mohegans and the Pequots obviously contribute a great deal in their slot revenues and in their iGaming. And I think there's a way to address the fiscal issues through that fund. The tribes have, you've heard the numbers. I mean, it's what, 7 or 8 billion now. They've given the state a lot of funds. And I think the way to address the fiscal issue is through that fund. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else on this topic? All right, if hearing none, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is discussion of the implications of congressional status regarding the Mohegan Agreement. And I believe Attorney General Roberts has got information
Yeah,
for us.
thank you, Chairman. And I just want to say this is largely in response to Chairwoman Horn's question from our previous session. And so if we could just go to the first slide. You know, it's the Mission Impossible secret key code that makes them disappear. New career, thank you. Great. So first slide, just want to highlight, you know, it sounds like, you know, Mashantucket has put forward their proposal. Mohegan is putting forward a proposal as well, which we talked about before. I will just say a couple of reasons why we are putting forward this proposal is one, it avoids litigation. It avoids additional approvals by the Department of the Interior. It's fully transparent in that we're asking for basically an offset for payments made. And so it's also fully auditable by the state. I would say that this offset or this credit proposal there is no new appropriation tied to that because it's basically allowing both tribes to take a credit or an offset. And as Ms. Conway said, like with regard to the slot revenues and the iGaming funds, those are just continuing to grow over time. And so the impact really on the state is de minimis. I really think of it big picture of is rather than the tribes, both tribes providing monies to the state, to the Mashantucket Mohegan Pequot Fund, we are basically any revenues that either non-Indians or the tribes pay to the local governments are going directly to local governments, and we're just receiving an offset. So instead of going through the state, it's going directly to the towns. Next slide, please. And so our proposal, because it doesn't change the underlying agreement, because it doesn't change any legislation, it's very straightforward and easy to implement. And so we wouldn't require any sort of amendment. No amendment would be needed to the Montville Agreement or to federal legislation under this proposal. Next slide, please. So as we talked about at the previous meeting, we're always open to new ideas that reach equity and fairness with regard to taxation. If there is an idea in terms of how to approach this situation, both the federal legislation, which is highlighted here, provides for amendments to the agreement that would be approved by the Department of the Interior. And the next slide is also the Montville Agreement itself provides that it may be amended with the approval of the Department of Interior. And so I think the bottom line is Mohegan has laid out, and I think, you know, it's very transparent that the Montville Agreement is inequitable and unfair. We shouldn't be paying taxes on our tribal personal property, trust lands, or taxes with regard to non-Indian personal property. But it's important that this justice not be delayed, that it not be separated, that it not be taken up in some other shape or form. Mohegan would want this injustice to be addressed immediately as part of this broader working group. And so, but Chairwoman Horn, you had the question about what would need to be changed with regard to the agreements. Under Mohegan's proposal, nothing would have to be changed under the agreements. And so, or with regard to federal legislation. So with that, Chuck, I don't know if there's anything else. So very quick and happy to answer any questions.
I have a question. I understand. So we're on page 2 in taxation of, that's the exemption we've been discussing. The other credit information here. I'm not sure I follow all that. How does that work then?
So let's say that Mashantucket's non-Indian vendors, right? They're going to make payments to Ledyard. And let's say those tax bills add up to $1 million. At the end of the year, Mashantucket would present those bills. Our non-Indian vendors have paid $1 million to Ledyard. We should have a deduction in our payments to the Mashantucket Pequot Fund of $1 million. Here are the receipts. And so there is no real appropriation involved with that, right? Because those non-Indian and Mashantucket actually, or Mohegan, gets the benefit of those tax dollars, right? Because they're getting a credit. So it's a way to respect the sovereignty of both tribes, but it's not, there's no fiscal appropriation impact. per
Right.
se.
But it's a loss of revenue to the state.
It is, but when you look at the overall total of I think it's $200 million that both tribes paid into the state just last year.
Mhm.
And those revenues continue to increase over time with iGaming and other gaming. It's a relatively de minimis amount.
Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. So I have a question and perhaps I'm just not getting it. So if you've ended taxation of non-Indian personal property on tribal land, how do you result apart from Mohegan because of your Montville agreement for certain payments with tax credits that are then due?
We would do the same thing. So if the Mohegan tribe pays $1 million, let's say, in real property taxes to Montville, we would present those receipts to the state and say, we're going to lower our amount to the Mohegan Pequot Fund by $1 million, because that has already gone to a local government.
Okay, so we pass legislation ends taxation of non-Indian personal property on trust land. So in effect, Mashantucket, that's it, we're done. The city's, Ledger doesn't get any more money. How
No,
does- but
I guess, I'm
just
sorry.
Sort of seeing how Ledger
I'm
is
s-
made whole through, or the
I'm
other
sorry,
towns
so
are through your proposal. Am I being clear?
It's my fault. It's my fault
Okay.
because the slide isn't clear.
Okay.
And that's my fault. So the broader, I was just saying the broader point for point one is we all agree we
Okay.
should end taxation for non-Indian personal property. What the
But
proposal,
absent that, this
but-
is the step forward.
how we achieve that principle is that both tribes take credits from the Mashantucket Mohegan Pequot Fund. So for example, you're ending the non-Indian personal property on trust land through payments to Mashantucket.
So this
or
is how,
not
so
payments,
it
but
still
credits.
continues, but both tribes were made whole by having that money credited to what you would have sent to the state.
Correct.
Okay,
Dollar for dollar.
okay. But to the secretary's point, we are reducing, even out of a growing pool of money, it does reduce the money coming to the state of Connecticut.
From the tribe.
From the
exactly.
tribes, right?
Okay, all right. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was getting my head around how this would in fact play out.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Senator Austin.
Thank you. But this would not really deal with the sovereignty issue. It still allows the taxation to continue. It
So-
just requires the taxation to be paid for by the state.
I would say it's a recognition of sovereignty in the sense
But it
that,
doesn't stop it. So we could, like, if you're doing business on Mohegan and you're doing all the economic development for that business. So
I'm sorry. I'm
I know,
having a
just
hard
don't
time.
disregard them. They're talking,
Sorry.
just disregard them. Pretend you're in a public hearing where everybody's talking around you. And all of that work is done by the tribal nation, but the state is going to take up the cost that would have gone to the town.
Well, so I would say that this is a recognition of tribal sovereignty in the sense that if the state goes this approach, right now, the state of the law is that and we all say that we all acknowledge this case is wrongly decided, but the state of the law right now is non-Indians are subject to personal property taxes. And so this is a recognition by the government of Connecticut to the sovereign governments of both tribes that this agreement is wrong and this is how we're going to fix it. We're going to make you whole.
We're
through
gonna
the
make
credit
you
approach.
whole with state dollars.
No, with
our
Mohegan,
dollars.
with our dollars that
It's
we
not your
pay to the state.
dollars, it's our dollars once it crosses the checking account. It's our
Well, I
dollars.
think,
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think,
Yeah.
at the,
It's not pushed across the table.
No, because it would be pushed across the table already. You would already be doing it.
No.
Yeah, we'd have to, and beyond that, how much land are you planning on taking into trust?
oh, I have no idea. I mean,
So
you know,
if
the
it would
tribe
say,
thinks in terms of 7 generations, right? And
I,
so,
I agree.
but right now, I mean, the fact of the matter is no tribe should have to, I know you agree on this, that no
I
tribe should have to
do.
pay property taxes on its trust lands.
I
So,
agree, but I don't agree that the state should take on those costs because say you get 600 acres and each acre is worth $3,000. So if I was going to buy open space land, I used to do open space land all the time. $3,000 times 600 or 700 acres. That's how much would be coming off of the Mohegan Pequot Fund. And it's going to be more than that because your agreement allows them to tax you for the structures on that land. Because it's not just as land. And so if I'm gonna do 3,000 times 600,
Just doing math, ladies and gentlemen.
no, it's gonna be bad.
So, you know, I think in terms of, so the concept is there and it's a way
1.8
that
million.
is actually very clean, very transparent, very easy to implement, and is auditable, right? And you know exactly what they are. And I will just say the fund has increased over time. The
Mhm.
payments are probably more than anyone imagined back in
Mhm.
whenever the fund was put into place.
They're based on your revenues though, right?
They are.
So those have grown too.
Correct.
I should give you the same opportunity to respond to the question I asked Attorney Conway a couple of meetings ago. We're using pretty broad sweeping language about sovereignty and equity and things like that. And we're focused on this narrow issue of personal property tax on non-tribal businesses. But wouldn't the same principles obtain for sales taxes collected by the state for activity on, and as well as income taxes collected on the
You know,
reservation?
we haven't focused on the sales taxes and income taxes. We're focused on, you know, addressing the inequity that's with the agreement and with non-Indian personal property. And I will say that the broader
Is it not
framework.
inequitable though, for us to be collecting sales tax and income tax on activities on the reservations?
I think the law is a little bit different, treats those subjects a little bit differently in terms of where individuals reside, and those type of questions. And so again, you know, this working group is focused on the taxation of federally recognized tribal nations. This is a taxation directly on tribes as opposed to individuals that you're talking about.
Attorney Conway.
So the issue, I appreciate the presentation and the use of the fund. The problem from the Pequot's perspective is that you're still allowing the town of Ledyard or Montville to tax on the reservation. And that puts in their hands how they tax, how much they tax, who they tax, what property is taxed, as opposed to allowing each tribe to make that decision on their reservation. I have no problem with, you know, using the fund to assist these towns in making up for some of that revenue, but putting the ability to tax in the hands of the town is the sovereignty issue. It seems that is only addressing the money part of it and not the sovereignty part. And I understand what you're saying. It is a recognition because you're going to pay the money back, but you've given them the tax policy. So it is up to the town how they implement that tax policy. You know, they can come on reservation under tax law and seize property. I don't think there could be more of an infringement on tribal sovereignty. So I appreciate and I agree 100% that we have to be thinking creatively and be thinking about these issues, but allowing them to continue to tax is not acceptable.
Ms. Swift.
I totally agree with Attorney Conway's point. And additionally, it doesn't address the deterrent of economic development on the reservation by non-Indians, because that presents as a problem.
Any other questions or comments on this topic?
I just,
Yes, Mr. Bennell. Oh,
isn't the definition of sovereignty, not the lawyer up here, but for each government to decide for themselves what's acceptable to them, what they find within that government and those elected, in our case, 9 people, to decide what is acceptable. That's their sovereign right. And other governments may disagree, and that's why we're all here. But in Mohegan's case, their sovereign right is to decide that that's acceptable to them. And Mashantucket, their sovereign right is to say, well, that doesn't work for us. But to say that shouldn't work for Mohegan, or that's crossing a line. Or frankly, for another government to say, we're going to tell you what is sovereign for you, that's a little touchy.
Representative Horn has her hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a point of clarity question. And maybe this is for Senator Austin, but the proposal regarding the taxation of non-tribal property located on tribal lands, doesn't that also use roughly 500,000 each from the Mashantucket Mohegan funds to pay that 500,000? Did I get that wrong?
No, you have that right. That's to hold them harmless. That is not to continue in the future. And we could, as a state, say we're not going to hold you harmless and just take that money from the 2 towns. I disagree with taking the money from the 2 towns without finding a way to make them whole, as we have been making them whole for a number of years. And that is a totally different, we still would pass the policy, but we would say the policy of taxing non-tribal personal property ends. And in order to change a policy that was wrongly decided a number of years ago, to change that policy, we're making the 2 towns whole. Some people wanted to do it through pilot. I think the MMPF fund is the more appropriate. The way the Mohegans are suggesting doing it totally allows the policy to continue. Doesn't have any controls over whether or not we continue paying for economic development on the 2 tribal nations. It just doesn't end a bad policy. It continues that policy. And if Mashantucket or Mohegan is going to do another economic development in their particular reservations, we have no control over that, nor should we. They could do that, but we don't need to have them share that money with the respective towns that they're next to. It would be the same thing as if Hartford is developing Excel. And we're hoping that they're very successful. But the town right next to them might not like the traffic there and say, for that additional traffic and for those additional police officers that we have to use, we are going to tax the town of Hartford. We are allowing a policy to stand that would only replicate that policy across the state through different municipalities.
But presumably, isn't that so? I see that there are 2 parts to each. So just focusing on the taxation of non-tribal property, there is 2 parts of it. One is stopping the policy, passing legislation that says you can't do that anymore. The other part is to hold the towns harmless. So that's the fiscal flow. Couldn't we do the same thing on the other end? Admittedly, it's more complicated in terms of how you go about addressing that agreement, potentially needing, the Department of the Interior approval. But that also has 2 parts: the fiscally hold them harmless,
Right,
and the ending the policy.
And we already have passed that piece of policy in that we pay 100% of in-trust lands already. And when they add on to in-trust lands, the towns are getting more money that way. Already.
Right. But I'm talking about the flow of money that goes from under the Montville agreement that goes from the Mohegans to Montville. That is
Talking
essentially property tax.
500,000, the 500,000.
Right.
The 500,000, let's find out what Montville and Mohegan come up with as an agreement. So Mashantucket already does pay on their own for some road infrastructure for Ledyard. They do that on their own. I'm assuming that Mohegan is not saying let's damage the relationship with Montville, and we're not going to ever pay for anything on the capital account. I think they're going to be still continuing to be good neighbors, and they're going to want to help out there. Let's see what they come up with a policy change first, but allow them to have that original conversation with the town of Montville and see where they end up. And the agreement allows for that original conversation to happen. And that original conversation hasn't happened yet. We don't know that that's what they want to do or they don't want to do. Until they do that, it makes it hard for us to tell the town of Montville, we're not even going to allow you to have a conversation with Mohegan, because that's what we would have to do if doing it this other way. We would say to Montville, we're not going to allow you to have that conversation.
Well, I certainly agree that whatever we do should incentivize good relations between
Correct.
the tribes and, to continue that in that front. So thanks.
So just to correct the record, we
Mr.
talked to
Bunnell?
Montville, sorry, through you, Mr. Chairman. We talked to Montville probably on a weekly basis. I've been there 25 years. We have talked about the agreement repeatedly. And frankly, Montville asked Mohegan to be a better neighbor and double the money. They have frankly never put on the table a reduction, but quite the opposite. So to say that it hasn't happened or those discussions don't happen, they actually are constantly happening.
Which is why
Senator Austin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I apologize. That's why I'm suggesting that we take Section 1F out of the agreement that the state has between Montville, between Mohegan and the state, because that set up this bad policy. And that was signed first. And that needs to change. For the record, that needs to change. Cannot stand any longer. It just can't stay. But it's not about the money. It's about the policy. And our policy was wrong back then. It's still wrong today. It will be wrong in 30 years if we don't fix it.
Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. But with all due respect to Senator Austin, yes, there is the inequity, but in effect, it is all about the money. This is about, we hear the argument that there's not going to be economic development because businesses are being, because of this inequitably enacted policy, they are not going to want to come here. So how are we going to get rid of this whole money argument? I mean, yes, the sovereignty issue, but it's end of the day, is it about the money? This discussions we're having, how will we fill in the hole? If it's the hole to the towns, or it's the hole to the state, or it's the hole to the tribes. So you cannot absent that money piece, as worthy as all the arguments are, from a sheerly practical point of view. And that, for me, at the end of the day, it's how do you fix the money piece, because that's what the towns are going to want. That's what the tribes are going to want, and we cannot come up with a solution unless we come up with a way that fixes the money piece. Am I being naive here?
Senator Austin?
Thank you. And that's exactly why we passed a policy in the implementer on in-trust land. And in-trust land right now pays for all in-trust land 100%. And doing it this way by having Mohegan get paid back for the taxes they pay to Montville will allow Montville to see increases in pilot payment, totally increases in pilot payment because of the law that we've already passed. And on top of that, get taxes. So they would have, in effect, be double dipping on a policy that's already in effect. And we did that because we felt that the communities needed to be recognized by changing the law from 45% to 100%. so that the towns were getting 100% of the current in-trust land. The current in-trust land is paid in its entirety. Yes, it's about the money, but we are already doing that. By doing it this other way, we are double dipping on the money for one town, for the town of Montville on top of that. We also should be looking at a number of other things. The fact is that the assessor in both Montville and Ledyard completely do different things relative to reservation land. And the reservation land for Ledyard is significantly less than the reservation, assessed at significantly less than the reservation land in Montville, which is valued at 3 times the value of the reservation land in Ledyard. We have a lot of work to do, but that doesn't mean that we allow a bad policy to sit on the books. This bad policy has said that we allow sovereign nations to be treated as if they didn't exist. If we leave this policy on the book, it says that those sovereign nations don't really exist. They exist in some peripheral part of the atmosphere out here, but it doesn't mean that we are really respecting those sovereign nations. If we want to respect them, then we should respect them and not say we're going to give them back the money, because that's really the be all end all. I think that we have to allow the towns of Montville and Mohegan to have that agreement. I've talked with counselors on the agreement, on the city council of Montville. They say they've not been included in those discussions. So I would strongly suggest that those discussions include the counselors too. That's something that I think has to happen. But I think that if we're not going to address the sovereign nation of this, then it's a moot point, because it's really leaving a racist policy in existence.
Chairman.
Attorney General Roberts.
Just 2 very, very quick points. One is, if the legislature were to pass just a policy change, as we talked about before, it really doesn't address Mohegan, it addresses Pequot situation and leads to litigation for us. Number 2, just listening to the discussion, it may be that the legislation needs to address the unique circumstances of both tribes separately. So maybe Mashantucket would like a bill that provides for no taxation of non-Indian personal property. And that same bill provides for Mohegan to have an offset against the funds it pays to the Mohegan Mashantucket Pequot Fund that respects both tribes' sovereignty, puts both tribes on an equal playing field. It addresses an equitable situation of the situation that was, as Senator Austin mentioned, was put into place by the state. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Are there other questions or comments on this? That gives me the thought that if we're going to have recommendations, maybe before we do, we'll need to come up with a date and time for the next meeting. But at that meeting, probably be our last meeting before the deadline. I wonder if it's appropriate, and people can discuss this if you like, to draft recommendations, offer them and circulate them ahead of the meeting so we can begin to see in writing what people have in mind. I've drafted a few in my head while sitting here today. Thoughts on that?
Sounds good.
That sounds like a good idea. Sounds great.
Why don't we circulate those draft recommendations by Friday, December 1st, which is about 2.5 weeks from now, I think. And we'll have a meeting. How about the week of December 11? We're doing the fiscal accountability report on the 4th. So the week after that, maybe I'll still have strength. Rating agency presentations last week of November. It's a big month for OPM. That was my thought. I think at this meeting, the Mohegan tribe also wanted the opportunity, I think, to present more information, or did you feel like you got to do what you wanted to do today? Because we can put that on the agenda as well. Should be our last meeting in December, week of the 11th. Anyone online have thoughts about that? All right, well, we'll shoot for that then. for date and time and content of what would be our last meeting of this group. Presumably not our last meeting ever, so
I think we'll have a few in between.
I'm guessing we will.
All right.
Okay, anything else for the good of the order? Anyone online? All right, last on an item on our agenda is adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Moved in second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? We're